everyone, and welcome to the last book launch at the third BangkokEdge Ideas Festival. A LUANG PRABANG love story is set in the riverside Laos city in the 1930s and tells the story of Kam Piu and Prince Suvarnabhuma. Anthropologist and granddaughter Mani-Samouth sets this love story against the vivid backdrop of LUANG PRABANG with its age-old tradition and complex history. She is in conversation with most admired Nerissa Chakrapong's festival director and publisher. Thank you very much.
Well, Mani-Samouth, it's so lovely to see some of your relatives here today, and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to pronounce their names because it's very difficult in the book. We'll come to that a bit later on. But I wonder, first of all, we're going to look at some slides. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Can we start? Yeah.
So when did you first become aware of your grandmother's story?
Since my childhood, because I grew up with my grandmother, and every night she will tell story. She always tells stories, and also her story with grandfather Suvarnabhuma.
Because in the book, he's very intrigued by her storytelling, isn't he? He's very impressed by that side of it. Would you like to describe their first meeting? Because I think that's very beautifully written in the book.
So the first meeting occurred during the New Year in LUANG PRABANG in April 1930. And Prince Suvarnabhuma just came back from France. He studied engineering there, and he came back. So he came to the New Year, and my grandmother went also to the market. There are 3 days during the New Year in LUANG PRABANG. So, and the third day they met. And on the first day, they met, and he just fell in love.
Now, you'd expect, wouldn't you, perhaps, that Kam Piu's mother would be delighted that her beautiful daughter had caught the eye of a handsome, wealthy prince. But that wasn't quite the case, was it?
That was not the case because there are too many reasons for that. The first reason it was they had some old family issues between both families, and the second reason is that although my grandmother was an aristocrat family, but her rank was still lower than Prince Suvarnabhuma, who belonged to the front lineage. So it means that marrying to a nobleman meant to move to the bridegroom family. So the great-grandmother, she could not accept that. She wanted to have her son-in-law at home.
And how long did it take, do you think, for them to win Kam Duong over to the marriage?
Almost a month. And we cannot say that my grandmother, at the time, we cannot say openly your love to someone. But the fact that she came, that during their courtship, Prince Subhamapura came every night on the veranda, and my grandmother also sat on the veranda and looked at him. That was the only way to declare her love. Means that they were really, in love. But the grandmother, she gave so many reasons to refuse his proposal, and at the end he kind of elle a mis devant le fait accompli.
Yes, he's a very determined character. One of the things that comes out of the book, I think, very well is the position of women in those days, which they were not in an equal position with men, and certainly not if the man was a prince. Would you like to say a little bit more about the position of women in Luang Prabang at that time?
Actually, the position of women in the traditional culture of Lao and in Luang Prabang, the women have quite a strong power, but it only applies to the commoner and the aristocracy, meaning that when someone gets married, the husband comes to the wife's family. But on the contrary, in Luang Prabang, the nobility, the woman went to the husband's family. So, yeah.
Now, at this time in Luang Prabang, Laos had become a country, hasn't it? Because until the French protectorate of 1893, I believe, there were 3 separate countries, weren't there, which Luang Prabang was a separate country. So in the book there are hints about how the French and the Lao interact. And obviously Prince Suvarnabhuma had been in Paris studying. But what was the general atmosphere with the French there? Did the Luang Prabangese like the French, or did they feel oppressed? Or?
There were no acrimony, and most of the nobility and aristocracy work for the French government. But still, they cannot accept a marriage between a French and a Lao.
Because Campio had attracted the attention of a French person. Could you say a little bit more about that?
It was the deputy French resident, and at the time, the great-grandmother, who has been widowed for some years, she went to have her pension from the French resident. So she was always going along with her daughter, her elder daughter Campio. And when the deputy saw her, he immediately asked for her hand. And that was not acceptable for the great-grandmother as well.
So, Mani-Samouth, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about you? Because I think, the person behind the book is also interesting, and your background, where you were born and that sort of thing.
I was born in Vientiane, and I grew up in Chiang Mai, and also in southern China, in Sichuanpana. And I went to study in France when I was 15.
So do you speak Chinese as well as...
A little bit.
Yeah. And what was that like? What was your childhood like at that time?
Yeah, very nice, because I grew up mostly in the countryside with close ethnic groups close to the Lao, the Lu, and the Khon Muang in Lan Na. So I grew up with them, with their traditions, and so that's why in the book I talk about the Lu tradition, because I grew up with them and I know some of their traditions, as well as Khon Muang traditions.
now you're working with them now, aren't you? And is part of your work now, you're an anthropologist,
Yes.
aren't you? So
Yeah.
could you say a little bit about your work?
Yeah, I did my PhD on the tradition of the great drums of northern Laos and then of the northern Thai people, the northern Buddhist Thai people. It is a tradition that dates back from the 7th century. So I did a lot of field research to collect data on these drums. And these are traditions that has been lost now because all people, they all passed away. So I was very lucky to collect all this data. And it shows that all these northern Thai people were linked. And up to now, we still have relationship with the Shan, the Lu, and the Lanna people.
Because I think after this you're going to Nan, aren't you? And you have family in Nan who've lived there for 200 years or something.
And some of them are here also. To Nan. Nan, it was at the time in Luang Prabang, so there were no borders. So many family of Luang Prabang had teak plantation in Chiang Mai. So the easiest way to come to Chiang Mai was through Nan by elephants. So that's why we still have.
So when you were writing the book, were there any things that you hadn't expected? Were there any shocks that you discovered in doing research for the book, or anything that was upsetting? Or
it was quite a bit challenging to express the emotion of, because I listened to what she told me, and I remember every time she told the story, she was a little bit crying because it was very emotional. So it took a little bit time to write it down.
It's because it's quite interesting, actually. Both of us have written about our grandmothers, and it can be very emotional. And I remember when I had to write about my grandmother getting divorced from my grandfather, even though I didn't know him or her, it was still very upsetting. And I think there's some, I think people will find when they read the book that it's actually very emotional in places, isn't it? Yes. So, what do you think was the happiest memory of your grandmother and in her marriage?
Her happiest memory was because she was married only 2 years before getting separated. But her most cherished memory was when she and Prince Suvarnabhuma, when he was still an engineer, were doing field works in the countryside, and she felt very free there to be with him and not in the front palace, which was very hard for her. And also all this memory that they shared together, they had the time for themselves.
Now, I don't think it's really a spoiler, but I would like to ask this question. In the front palace, she had a terrible time, didn't she?
Yeah.
And there were these 3 nieces, and I'm not sure if any of the relatives of the nieces are here today.
Hopefully not.
And the nieces made her life complete misery, didn't they?
Yeah.
So what happened to the nieces? Because they planned to marry Prince Suvarnabhuma, and that didn't happen because of Mom Kampu. So what happened to the nieces?
They got married, but not to princes.
And did they ever see each other again? I mean, did Mom Kampu? Because later on it seemed that Mom Kampu went and played that game quite often with
The Python.
Yes, with Suvarnabhuma's sister, who hadn't liked her.
Yeah.
What about the nieces? Did she have to meet them in everyday life, or
During their first life together?
after when they were separated? Did she ever see the nieces
No,
again?
because they got married, and because they didn't marry princes, so they had to leave the front palace.
And what about the sister? She became quite friendly with the sister.
She was very nice in the end, and even when they reunited, she was one of the one who was present.
So have you been back to Luang Prabang to meet some of the descendants of the people that are mentioned in the book?
Yeah. Yes.
Would you like to say a little bit about that? Tell us about Luang Prabang when you went back the first time. What was it like?
Oh, I was very young. So, but I have been living in Luang Prabang since about 15 years. So we still have good contacts, and the people, all family in Luang Prabang, they still play the python games. So it's a habit that cannot.
This is something that's in the book. They like to play a card game, and it's sort of a gambling game, isn't it? Or something?
Yeah, it's a gambling. It's actually it's a very common game in Quang Trung province, but in Luang Prabang is special for the aristocracy.
And there's one story you tell about when they've separated, and she's married again, and the son is very ill, and her husband has to ride through the night.
Mm-hmm.
And you say quite an intriguing sentence, but you don't elaborate about narrowly avoiding a tiger attack.
Yes.
So what was that? What was
Because he was in the countryside, and he heard about her miscarriage. So the prince just came, and it was the jungle at the time in Luang Prabang. So there were so many wild animals, tigers.
Gosh. And what about the family temple? Because I think you know, one of the slides shows the family temple, doesn't it?
There are 2 or 3 family temples, but the main one is Bat Siang Wan, where all the family gather during ceremonies and they perform rituals. It's the main family temple.
Has everyone here been to Luang Prabang? Because, you know, it's the most magical place, isn't it? I mean, how do you feel about it now? Because it's become very touristic, but...
I think that Luang Prabang has lost its soul.
Yeah. So you don't go back anymore?
Yeah, when I have to, I go.
So maybe I'm going to throw the floor open to other people to ask questions. I mean, I've sort of alluded to some of the themes of the book. It's a very touching, lovely story, and I think you'll all enjoy it very much. But maybe you'd like to ask Mani-Samouth some other questions.
I didn't know if you wanted to comment on your slides.
Yes, would you like to go through the slides again and just you know, expand on them? Yes.
So this is my grandmother, Kampiu, when she was 16, just 1 year before she got married to Prince Suvarnabhuma. So you can see that according to tradition, she has anklets, so it means that she was still single. And here is on the right side is her father, Chao Phaya Luang Munna, and his wife, Chao Kham Pui, who was the sister of the Queen Kham Pui mother. And on the left, no, it's the grandfather of my grandmother, and on the right is her father Kham Pui, and all the younger sister and brothers. This is the great-grandmother, Kham Duong. The year Kham Piu got married, and her...
Very fierce lady. Very fierce. She tried to stop the marriage in many ways.
Yes. And this is Wat Siang Wan temple. So at each generation, the women of the family do renovation offerings, and up to now, and with my cousin, we always do this up to now. This is behind the great Buddha. This is the pabot that my grandmother ordered when she was 36, after she lost her second husband. And these two stupas are the origin of one of the legend of the family. So you will read it in the book. This is the market, the Luang Prabang traditional market. And so it was during this kind of market that Prince Suvarnabhuma and Kampiu met. This is the Sanam Kiang, the basket, the traditional basket that belonged to her. And when she met the prince, she wore this. Yeah. This is the skirt that she wore during the day of her meeting with Prince Suvarnabhuma. Yeah. It was, we kept it. It is the Down Street mansion where Prince Suvarnabhuma lived, where my grandmother went to live after her wedding.
Does the mansion still exist?
Now it is the Suvarnabhuma Hotel.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. This is Prince Suvarnahat, the half-brother of Prince Suvarnabhuma, and the one who came to ask for the hand of my grandmother, to great-grandmother Kamduang. So the downstream mansion is downstream the Mekong, and Ban Siang Wan is upstream after the royal palace. This is the scarf that she wore during the day of her wedding. Yeah.
So is this the scarf that horrible girl tried to pull off her?
Yeah. And it's made of gold threads and
It's beautiful.
silk, yeah.
Yeah.
This is the skirt that she wore during the day of her wedding. It was during her second marriage to Pia Kam Wan, my grandfather, and they were at the time living in Pongsali province at the Chinese border. So the population of Pongsali is mainly composed of Lu people. Pongsali is part of ancient kingdom of Sichongpana, and some are also Taigam. So it was my grandmother wearing the royal court attire, and she was about 60 at the time. So this is Prince Suvarnabhuma and my mother.
So can I just ask you one last question? So what are you going to do next? Are you going to write another book, do you think, or?
I hope so.
You want to tell us a bit about it?
Maybe not on the same subject, but I'm doing some research on ginger. On ginger tradition, so maybe.
Ginger the plant?
Yeah, the plant.
Yeah, that's nice. It sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
Why did you choose that?
It's related to my anthropology research. When I did research, I found out that many rituals use many kinds of ginger, and so it's very interesting for me to research on that.
Well, I think if you read the book, you'll find that it's very, very interesting about all the traditional customs of Luang Prabang, all the things you can and can't do, and especially for some Thai people, they'll recognize A lot of similarities about which days you can cut your hair, which days you can cut your nails, which days you can wash your hair, all that sort of thing. And it's really fascinating and really brings the story to life. But now, do you think anyone would like to ask any questions about the book?
I'm looking very much forward to reading your book. My question is, when you have to write about family history and your grandmother's no longer there, you must have questions you wish you could ask her. What are the questions you wish you could have asked your grandmother now, if you could talk to her?
I would have asked more questions about the details of the Luang Prabang tradition that are lost now, and I wish I had, because from a family point of view, I think I have collected all the information I could collect, but there are some missing tradition now that don't exist anymore. And yeah, I really regret that I didn't ask more questions about that.
How old was she? She's not alive anymore, right?
No, she passed away in 1988.
And how old were you when she passed away?
13. Yeah. But every night I slept with her, so she has a very good memory. So she will tell all kinds of story of Luang Prabang and about her life also in Luang Prabang. Yeah.
Well, I haven't read the book yet, but I'm looking forward to it definitely. I wanted to ask one thing about your family. As far as I know, one of the daughters of Prince Suvarnabhumi married an American diplomat. Is that lady related to you? Is it your aunt?
I call her aunt anyway, but she's the daughter of the second wife of Prince Suvarnabhumi.
Yeah.
And when they divorced in 1967, so my grandmother and so maybe I should not say. Yeah, my grandmother and Prince Suvarnabhumi got married again.
I see, because that diplomat wrote a brilliant book called In a Little Kingdom. Unfortunately, it was not, I think it was like 3,000 copies only. In a Little Kingdom, yeah. Yes, I think 1979 or 1980
Yeah.
edition. Thanks.
Mani, thank you for your book, because I really enjoyed it. And one of the things I was amazed about was I know that Narissa talked about the traditions and all the intricate details, but also it's, from your anthropologist point of view, it's an incredible record of how these people behaved in the royal family. And, you know, obviously that's one day is going to be lost, so how will you record all those instances you had, you know, in the palace? It's an amazing sort of history of, you know, how these people got on. Some of them are really quite fierce, I think, sometimes.
So what's exactly your question?
How will you keep that alive? How will you keep that going? How will you keep those records
Alive.
I think she has in the book. He wants you to record more of the traditions of the royal family.
That's why I regret that I didn't ask more questions about with my grandmother.
Yes,
Yeah.
all stories. You must have all stories.
About the family? Yeah.
Maybe some of them are more difficult. It's
Yeah.
because it seems that everyone in Luang Prabang at that time knew everybody, and it's all seems to be very interwoven. So maybe, I don't know. Do you have more stories you can tell? You know, by asking other members of the family, because I think what he's saying really is that you tell a good story, like your grandmother. So maybe you could record more sort of details of the life of the royal family of Luang Prabang, perhaps,
Yeah.
from other members, perhaps, of the family.
But Grant Evans has written a book about the royal family. The Lao, I think that he did a lot. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, this is a delightful read, and you know, it talks talks about tradition, but it also talks about love, and it talks about Laos of that time, because Kampu doesn't just live in Luang Prabang. Later on, she goes to live, as Mani-Samouth has said, in Pong Sali. And so I think it's a very delightful portrait of something that's disappeared, really. This is the museum closing down. It's nothing to do with us. Anyway, would anyone else like to ask any questions?
Just a follow-up. Is it going to end? No? Okay. Could you say something about your years in China? How did you end up in China? And is it due to your parents' occupation? What did they do?
My father worked at CNRS, the National Center of Scientific Center, and he was sent to do research in Sichuan-Pana. In 1986 to 1988. Yeah.
Adding to the previous discussion, Grant Evans wrote a good story, and there are other historians who wrote about the Lao royal family. But you can do that basically from the inside. You can talk to the relatives. You can do an oral history.
Yeah, it is oral, mostly oral.
It is already, but you can do a wider one. You can talk to other relatives you have.
If they're willing to tell.
Maybe some of them.
So should we go outside, and anyone would like to buy the book, and you can also talk more to Mani-Samouth outside, and she will be signing copies of the book. So thank you very much, everyone, and this is the last book launch of the festival, so thank you all for coming.